with, well, I was born in Detroit, Michigan. So, yeah, actually, I've been living and working in the DC area for a little while now. It seems that I try to escape and keep ending up back here. It's a definitely different type of climate for recruiting, and I've been primarily working in the intelligence community for quite a while. And that is a whole different approach to things. But while I've done that, I also have my own company, and I'm permitted clients that don't compete, with what I do, and that has made it fun because I've been able to recruit for like a precast concrete sales manager and a certified underwater archaeologist and
Wow.
different types of roles like that, which are, there are only 6 in the United States that are certified, and I got 1. So
Hey,
pretty
congrats.
excited about that. So so that keeps things really fresh and live for me.
Well, I have a question just to start. We have been promoting this and trying to get people to embrace Recruit Human, but can you share a little bit about why you are so passionate about that and what it means to you?
That's a really great question. So I think that the reason why I'm so passionate about it is that right now the emphasis is on all of the new and cool tools, which I agree they are cool. They're the scraping tools, there are all the things that can run data analytics, there are all these, really fantastic ways that actually just keep you behind a computer, when you're recruiting. And I feel that when you look at the statistic of, they say 75 to 85% now of all positions industry-wide are filled by networking and referral. And so if that's the case, then why are we spending, 75% of our time behind the computer? So I really believe that it's about getting out and having conversations in person. And it's interesting how when you actually have to interact with people live, it changes the whole dynamic. You could possibly not need one particular candidate, but you've developed quite a trust relationship and you've provided something of value for them, and then what do? They refer their nephews, their neighbors, and anybody else, for your advice, and then you have a continuing increasing referral base. So it's really, it makes sense to do that from a business standpoint, but also as a recruiter, it helps you to learn how to have those conversations, not just by phone, not just in anonymity, but literally face to face, which, as you know, it can be hard to do when you are introverted.
That was my next question. I know that you're a self-proclaimed introvert. And so how do you mesh those two things together where you want to form those like one-on-one relationships, but maybe people that are more introverted try to, stay behind that technology? How do you do it? What are some tips?
I think that there is the need to become an ambivert. So I kind of went to elementary school several decades ago. And during that time, there was no official diagnosis for ADD. I found out in my 40s that it actually is a thing with me. In fact, it's so prevalent with me. They're like, well, you must have had really bad grades in school. And I'm like, no, I had to get A's and B's. And they're like, well, how did you do that? You must have learned how to compensate. So I didn't even know that I had done that. It was just something that I had to learn to do. And the same thing with people who think I'm just really the most extroverted person that they've known. Well, I think it's a learned thing. You do need to chameleon, especially in our industry, to be able to not be all things to all people, because you have your own, you have to be true to your own brand. But I think that there is a difference for me in relating with software engineers as it would be then with like admin assistants. They're just completely different ways of having to interact, and you need to find out what is the common ground. And so in order to do that, you are always others focused. And I think that's the greatest way to overcome your own self perceptions, is by always looking to see, how can I be serving another person? How can I help another person? And when you have that focus, that helps to help you forget about all of your other things that are going on inside, except for the distractibility. That kind of is always going on. Oh, squirrel, kind of thing.
Absolutely. Hopefully it's a purple squirrel. Maybe one of those.
With the unicorn horn in the middle.
Right. Rainbows, clouds.
Yes, yes.
Well, let me ask you, based on what you just said, do you have tips for people? Like, those are some tips of during the recruiting process, but what about that initial communication, like that first cold call, the dreaded first, cold call to a potential candidate? Do you work with scripts, or how do you work in that regard?
It's actually a homework thing and researching. And I really love how our community of thought leaders are all focused on the same thing. It's like, do your homework, find out about the person, what makes them tick, you know, what are the things that they like to do. And there are two things I always love to start with. It's the self-deprecating humor, you know, that has to do with, yes, I know you don't ever even want to self-identify as a recruiter, you know, and you give them some joke about it, which will usually disarm them because they're not accustomed to people making fun of themselves for their profession. And then once you do that, then the second thing would be, so I see that, you know, you actually led your team, you know, at college just 2 years ago, you know, in crew. So tell me how that has helped you, like in your current career, because you've been doing this for 2 years now. Do you believe that there were any, you know, traits that you have now that you got from, you know, being the crew leader? So it just helps to kind of take it totally in a different direction, but it's sort of like making it personal without saying, oh, I saw on Facebook that, you know, you had a cousin who died last week. Now, you know, it's like, yeah, you don't want to do that, but it kind of makes it a little bit more customized, if you will. So it's not just a canned approach that you use with every single person every time.
You brought up something, because I know you've dealt with software, and you just talked about in talking to, you know, well, you do have a big background. There's other roles that you have recruited for. Do you find that, or I should ask more importantly, what do you think is the difference, if any, between technical recruiting and recruiting for standard corporate jobs?
Well, one thing with technical recruiting is that, okay, let's take a software developer, software engineer, sysadmin, systems engineer. They have very, very specific skill sets, and they will smell out a fraud a mile away. So you cannot pretend to know what they're talking about. You need to be able to, like in my Uber on my way over here, someone got in the car. It was an Uber full share, and it was, he's a software developer. I said, oh, so full stack, front end, back end. And when I could ask him that, he's like, yeah, the back end. I said, oh, okay, so do you get to do the fun stuff, you know, with the data mining and whatever? And then when we were having just, it's casual conversation, but he feels like, okay, she knows a little bit about this, but she's not trying to pretend like she's a software engineer. So it kind of puts people at ease. You have to at least have some idea of what they do. So I think I took a book out, and it's either like Internet for Dummies or something like that, where it just starts with, this is the internet, this is the World Wide Web, and it actually shows how that works, and then it goes all the way into Scala and stuff like that, so that way I could have some kind of an understanding of what they do without trying to be an imposter, you know, and to try to come across as somebody that I'm not. So when they know that I have a basic understanding, that makes them comfortable, and then as they're talking, I actually can ask them questions about certain things. It's like, okay, well, when, you know, you're using Hadoop on the MongoDB, you know, what kinds of blah, blah, blahs, or, you know, do you find this problem to be insurmountable or whatever? So it's having a basic understanding, but also making it very clear, hey, I'm not the technical person here, you know, so I don't mean to insult you, you know, by stupid questions I might ask you or whatever, so it puts them at ease. Otherwise, it's like, why are you even talking to me?
I remember I went on a double date, and the gentleman, my friend's husband, just happened to be a developer, and I had no idea that he was a developer, and he had no idea that I was a technical recruiter, and we're having this conversation, and my husband goes, do you know what he just said? I was like, no, I just know he needs to have it. I was asking him all of these questions like I did. I was like, I don't know how to code. I know the theory behind the coding. I think that's really important, like you said. Well, I wanted to get back, and I'll keep kind of coming back. I'm, you know, looking at my squirrels too, I suppose. But I wanted to know, based on our current, let's say, normal recruiting process, we know what the standard is. How do you think that recruiters can recruit human?
Well, first of all, I'm sort of perplexed that recruiters are required to work in an office from 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. When you consider that most of your best candidates are working during those same hours, that's not a really good time to have recruiters trying to recruit good talent, right? So I think that my first starting point is, let's try to get this fixed, because I think that is a problem. I think that if you, for whatever reasons that are going on, that you have to work during those hours and can only work on premises, that would be great to be able to have more of a sourcing role, but if you're really going to have the conversations, when do people really talk to you? Again, I'm in the DC area, and people that I need to reach, they don't even have their phones with them during the day. They have no access to internet during the day, so I need to be available to talk to them, like when they're on their way to work at 5 a.m., when they get off work at 6 or 7 p.m., and snow days are the best days to talk to people, and weekends and holidays. I can remember taking a call from a candidate on Mother's Day, and my daughter was incensed, and just, it's like I had to explain afterward, well, I've been trying to get a hold of this candidate for 3 weeks, and so I'm going to take the call. This is really important. So being available when people are available is the most important thing, I think. And in order to do that, you can't really have an old model, if you will. Like, that kind of reflects to me going through paper resumes and, and fax machines and that sort of thing. It's like, this is not how our workforce is today. Our workforce has changed. Our approach to recruiting needs to change. It has to continually evolve as the workplace continually evolves, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. I was telling someone yesterday, and I think I posted it on Facebook, about I started recruiting in 2004, and they said, "Oh, you're an OG." I was like, I am. I didn't realize. Every year I get a little bit older. I get further away from the old days and the processing. And you're right. People are adverse to change and doing things the same way all of the time.
I guess if you look at the fact that right now 35% of the workforce is millennial. In 2020, which is just 2.5 years from now, 50% of the workforce is going to be millennial. So are we going to still keep recruiting using methodology that existed before, like 3 years ago? I don't think so. Not if we want to reach the workforce that's out there. We need to not just know how they want to be interacted with, but we also need to know what matters to them. Mission matters to them. Being a part of something more important is, it matters to them. Being valued for their contribution matters to them. So if we understand what matters, in the workforce today, then we can adapt what we're doing with recruiting to follow suit. Otherwise, we stand still and the workforce moves on, and we're still back here. Okay, how many phone calls did you make today? How many emails did you send out? It's like measuring things that don't matter. It'd be better for somebody to have one conversation with a software engineer over lunch that will give that person 3 referrals than it would be to send out 600 in-malls.
Right. Oh. And well, let me ask you this. What if you are recruiting and it's not in your, maybe it's not in your backyard and you do have to do it virtually? What do you recommend for connecting on that level?
I think that, again, it goes back to the research and the homework. Make sure that you are researching your candidates and finding out what's important to them. Look and see, who are they following? Who are they engaging with? What groups are they engaged in? If they're in tech, what are they posting up on, Stack Overflow, and what kinds of things have they shared on GitHub? Just really getting a feel for people in what they are doing and like to do. And so that, again, with the person with crew, I had no idea what crew even was before and so I had to do a little bit of homework. It's like, okay, so this is what it means to lead, the team, and then it's like looking at all of the different things that were involved. And it didn't take me 4 hours to learn about this. This was like a quick 3-minute tutorial, but it gave me at least some understanding so that I could have at least a credible conversation. And I'd be like, I don't really understand how all this works, but I do know X, Y, and Z. And then they feel like, okay, well, if you at least learn what X, Y, and Z is, I can take it from there. And then it really helps to open up a conversation. So the most important thing is finding great conversation starters But again, it's always about the other person, focusing on them.
And that being said, really quick, I want to remind people we only have like 11 minutes. It always goes so fast. 30 minutes is always fast. But as a friendly reminder, you can tweet out using the hashtag #OurDaily, and also make sure you can add your questions, and we will get those answered in the box below as well. Just a little recap. I have to always plug that back in there. But continuing the conversation, we spoke earlier about if you are and you are an introvert, what steps you can do, but do you have any recommendations for people that are extroverts but they are recruiting someone who's an introvert? Are there tips to make that experience more human as well?
Yes, there are. I actually did a workshop on interviewing for introverts, and so it was the reverse, so if I reverse engineer that back to the recruiter having to recruit somebody who is introverted, is to actually make sure that you are pausing, and letting them have time to think about their answer. I've actually coached people to say, if you are trying to formulate a response, all you have to do is just say, just give me a moment because I want to give you a thoughtful response. But just remember that they're not going to have those quick responses because they're thinking through what you just said, so you can put them at ease by saying, and by the way, take all the time you need to formulate a response because I know you're going to want to think about it, or whatever, and just sort of empathize and give them that freedom to feel comfortable about taking their time formulating their response or whatever, because you want them to not feel pressured or awkward, and that will really help to diffuse that.
I think it's funny how people can interpret someone their normal day-to-day behavior as positive or negative, but it just means maybe they want to, like you said, give a thoughtful answer, or just make sure they're getting themselves together is not a sign of weakness. We already know the answers we're looking for as recruiters. Sometimes you have to give a little bit more time and investigation to see exactly what's coming from someone who may not naturally share as much information.
Right, or maybe not perceive what might be important. So it's just always having good follow-up questions and do it in a very respectful way. Just not like, I really couldn't follow that, or that was really not enough information, but just say, oh, that's a really, interesting perspective, and can you tell me more about how that came about? Or, just do probing things, but not in an interrogating kind of way. Just more like keep it a conversation. That will help go along just to put people at ease.
Well, I'm going and I'm looking, and Mari Hannigan has a question, and I appreciate you being here, Mari. So the question is, how do you get hiring managers to understand that recruiting is human and they are connected to a human, or a connected human?
Hiring managers, okay. That is a fun topic. I think that the most important thing to be able to communicate with hiring managers is that most hiring managers think that they can interview and they've been doing it for 15 years and they don't need to be told how to interview. But I made it a requirement in one company where I brought all of the senior people, anyone who'd be involved with the interviewing process, to actually have them come in and do 30 minutes. I said, I just want 30 minutes of your time, and I'm bringing my tchotchke basket. You can pick whatever cool tool you want out of there, but, and I'm buying you lunch, but you're coming. And I actually had one senior software engineer look at me and said, I have been interviewing people for 8 years. He said, I really didn't have an idea about any of the things that you shared. And it was just eye-opening, so you kind of roll your eyes and you think, I know, just bear with me. But I think that when you explain certain things or tell stories, people will always remember stories. I think that storytelling is very important. So when you tell them stories of how people felt after coming out of interviews, and you don't point people out, but they're going to think, oh my gosh, that was me. And then it just helps them to understand the impact that they're having. And so I think that's important because they're not self-aware. Otherwise, they wouldn't keep replicating these isolating behaviors. So I think that a lot of it is that we spend so much time prepping the candidate to go and sit across from the hiring manager, but we're not spending the same amount of time prepping the hiring manager to interview human.
or spending the time to get to know your hiring managers.
Right, right.
That is important too, to make sure we know exactly, what
What
they're
makes
trying
sense.
to do.
And then
Well,
for them to believe that you really are on their side, that you're just really trying to help equip them to be the best them that they can be.
well, that's a whole nother show, a whole nother we have to figure that out. Well, Charm Brown has a question. LinkedIn seems to be turning into Facebook. A lot of complaining, a lot of drinking posts. Would you say it's still something that is a good go-to forum for recruiting?
That's a really great question. I will say that despite the fact that the statistics are 75 to 85% of all jobs are industry-wide are filled by networking and referral, do you know that 98% of recruiters who self-reported still say that they go to LinkedIn, to do their homework? I would say that it's a great place to do homework on a candidate. It may not be my first go-to, in terms of finding the right candidates, but I will go there to see what actually they have. And sometimes you will find inconsistencies between their resume and what they have on LinkedIn, and so that's a red flag. So I think it's an important tool in terms of verifying information and doing your research on how you're going to craft a conversation with the person, but I don't think that should be your initial go-to.
I agree with you. Well, there's so many resources. Also, if they're going straight into LinkedIn, and we know 98% are doing that as well, maybe you'll
Right.
have an edge if you find a candidate someplace else, maybe that isn't as available.
This is very true.
Well, Stephen Davis has a question. It says, let me change the tables. How do we get recruiters to be better than sending us, meaning hiring managers, internal recruiters, hiring managers are unqualified candidates? How do we change the tables on that, about that process?
I love this question because the answer is going to be the same of almost everything we've been talking about. It's called how to have a conversation. So if you are not getting qualified candidates from a recruiter, a sourcer, or anybody, basically you're getting people that you can't use. It's going to start with a conversation about what is important to you. So here are all the things, but you need to identify, okay, I don't really care about this, this, or this. Yeah, they have to have it, but I truly want a candidate who, and then describe the persona of the candidate that you're looking for, what this person looks like, what this person thinks and breathes and does in their spare time. Just what type of person are you looking at for this role, and asking all of the questions about, okay, so if you present this sort of a candidate to me and it's not working for me, then what are some things that we can change up, about how you're finding folks? And the vetting process is only as good as the parameters that you're being given by the hiring manager. So I think that it comes back to yet another face-to-face conversation, or by phone if you're in remote locations, but it's going to be about what are your expectations that aren't being met. Because it may just be that the people don't know. They may just have a list of requirements, but they don't really know what you want. So
I fully agree. It sounds like, and sorry that I was jumping in, but it sounds like respect and communication are key, to being able to look at people as real people,
right.
And not widgets.
Right. It's on both sides of the table. You have to be human beings no matter which side of the table that you're sitting on. And there's like 3 tables, because you've got your hiring manager, you've got the candidate, and everyone seated there. It's like the person in the middle has got to have the conversation with the hiring manager, and they have to have the conversation with the candidate. So we need to be communications experts.
It's funny. Stephen said, great response. Can you preach that more?
Well, you have to live what you say, that all the words that come out of your mouth, you have to live it, because that's the most important sermon anybody will get, is your life. So.
And you're a champion for, this Recruit Human movement, and sharing your information, and been so gracious. I was laughing when we were getting together about the show. I was like, you're always home for like a minute, and I haven't reached out, because the next minute it says, oh, I'm getting on a plane. Just got on a plane. Oh, just walked in my house. Oh, I'm leaving. Oh, you're always so busy. What would you say the best conference that you attended or where you led a session has been so far this year?
Okay, so I'm going to have to go back to the Elevate Summit that Bamboo HR put on for their users, primarily because I got to interact with, there were like 400 people there, and I got to interact with people, you know, throughout the day prior to my session, and they're like, oh, we can't wait to come to your session because it's basically the gist of it was recruiting on a shoestring budget, and I realized there were people there who had no resources to do their jobs. By the time I got back to my room, I basically told everyone I am redoing my entire slide deck. And I stayed up till 1:30 redoing my entire slide deck because I knew that I needed to give them different content than what I had sent in like the month before. And the thing that made the most sense to me was that, yes, it was stressful to do that, but I'm still, to this day, that happened in March, I'm still getting emails and LinkedIn messages from people saying, our whole team is now doing X, and these are the results that we're getting, and we're trying to implement Y. Any suggestions on how to take it further? It just, the fact that the interactions continue to this day, that to me was very powerful. To know that there's an ancient proverb that says your gift makes room for you, and I think that that's what's really important. It's as you give of what you have and what you know that the interactions come, and I think that that's really the way that we all learn and grow.
I appreciate that. That's a great answer. Now, I'm looking at the clock. We're winding down, but I really want to ask you this question. What type of advice would you give a brand new recruiter? They just got their login today, and they were told to hit the phones or hit, the social media. What type of advice would you give a brand new recruiter?
So for a brand new recruiter, I would say that the most important thing is to sit with a senior recruiter and ask questions about, what do you love about your job? What do you love about this particular company? What excites you to do this every day? What motivates you? And when you can find out what motivates a person, what they love about the company, then you can understand what those passions are. And the most important thing you need to cultivate is your own passion for what you're doing and for the company that you're representing or that you're being paid to do sourcing for. That it's important to have that, because without that enthusiasm and without that passion, it's not going to, a dead weight is going to come across no matter what conversation you have, whether it's on the phone or in person. I think that that's probably the most critical thing that a person needs to do, is to have their own story and their own reason for doing what they do.
And we started late. I'm going to throw this in here really quick from Amanda Hansen. She just sent it to me, and it's long, and I know she worked really hard on getting this question across. But it says, in today's recruitment world, which method of communication do you find to be the most beneficial to attract your candidate to your company? And we know you're passionate about face-to-face interaction, but what would you choose from phone calls, emails, text messages, personal messages on social media sites? What do you find is the most beneficial?
Okay, so beneficial is in the eye of the beholder, and it also depends on who your target audience is. And I can find that certain groups of people, texting works best, for an initial. And people are like, oh, I would never text anybody as a first, reach out. And I was like, have you texted anybody before? It's like, no, I don't text unless we've already, done X, Y, and Z. So I think it's just a matter of finding out, how do people like to communicate? That's number one. I know that somebody sent out a tweet that went viral about how, 6 ways to communicate with me, right? And one was climb through my window. That was even more, climbing through my window was more preferable than contacting me on LinkedIn. So wow. I think it's a matter of understanding how a person wants to be contacted. So do your homework on the demographic and also the type of industry, and find out what way works best for that person. And you might even contact them. Sometimes I've sent an email and left a voicemail and texted and said, okay, I've now tried to get a hold of you 3 different ways. I probably annoyed you 3 different times, but let me know what is the best way that you want to communicate with me. And then they'll usually laugh. It's like, okay, yeah, you tried all these ways, but really this is my favorite or preferred way, to communicate. You give them that option of telling you. And so that's another way to just kind of get around the whole thing. Just straight out ask them, how would you like for me to do this, after you've done it 3 different ways.
That is great. Like I never thought about that. Instead of just saying, I guess you don't like me, saying email's not working, InMail's not working. What do I need to do, right? Well, that being said, I love you. I am so glad that you were here and took the time. I know you're busy and going, to shifting off from wonderful exotic location to exotic location. But I appreciate you taking the time. I know Maury Hannigan, Charm Brown, Stephen Davis, and Amanda Hansen appreciated you being here as well. But I thank you. And as a reminder, this is going to be recorded. And Jo is very open and passionate about helping people, and for all recruiters, never be afraid to reach out. They got some good gems. A lot of people are very open about sharing, and Jo is one of those people. So,
and you can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jo, J-O, Weech, W-E-E-C-H. Out of 500 million profiles, probably 100 million of which are true.
Right.
I'm still the Jo Weech on there, so it's really easy to find me. So just connect with me. That's usually the best way. And then if you've got any follow-up questions, throw them at me. And if I don't know the answers, I have a great tribe of friends that I can put the question out there too. So thank you so much for having me. That's very kind of you, Jack.
Thank you. I hope you come back. We'll see you soon. And thank you, everybody, for joining. It was great. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.